6 months after their first meeting, Belle had become such an intricate part of his routine, Gold couldn't remember how he had gotten along without her. She would be his brightest spot in the mornings, all fresh smiles and gentle touches, for Belle, he had discovered, was a very hands-on person when she developed enough trust with someone else, still fighting him over tips from time to time and adding a second muffin to his order when she deemed he was looking a little gaunt. At lunch, they would be almost friends, each taking a break from the day to talk about current affairs, literature, movies, music, and everything in between. Gaston would glower in a corner, usually ready to point out when Belle was neglecting her job in order to help Gold with a crossword or argue with him about the best Umberto Eco book. Belle had won that. Of course, it was Foucault's Pendulum. In the evenings, there would be a lot less people, and Gaston would already be gone by then, so Belle would sit with Gold and they would talk about more personal stuff. He never told her his name or any specific details, but he'd complain about Mary Margaret and her rather inappropriate crush on the vice president of marketing, James Charmant, appointed by order of the company's second largest shareholder, George fucking King, his illegitimate father, of course. Or about that bitch in the Securities and Exchange Commission who was constantly trying to screw him over. He never mentioned her name was Regina Mills, but it was more because he rather enjoyed thinking up creative names for her and less because he wanted to keep his identity secret. She'd tell him a lot more. About her classes, she was majoring in both economics and English at Columbia, about how awkward work had become since Gaston had tried to ask her out. He had tripped him with his cane accidentally the day after she'd told him that, and she suspected it was not a coincidence. About how she had gotten interested in economics after taking on the difficult task of sorting out her father's finances — the man had no head for such matters — and about how she hoped to get an internship next year. He had discovered she had entered college at the age of 21 due to financial difficulties, and that she was currently 24. He had spent the rest of that particular day pointing out to himself how far from jailbait the age of 24 was. And the next time he had imagined tossing her over his table and dipping his cane into her till the ever-watchful Gaston suffered an apoplexy or went deaf from the sound of Belle's moans of pleasure, he had felt 100 times less guilty. They grew closer together due to an unfortunate incident one Friday night 6 months after their first meeting. He had been pretending to read the paper for 2 hours, though he had spent most of those hours teasing Belle for admitting that she had seen young Adam despite not liking the book very much, just because Ewan McGregor starred in the film. For shame, Belle. To watch a great piece of British independent filmmaking merely because a pretty boy plays the lead. He concealed his petty jealousy behind a shark-like smile and a reproachful look. The only other female barista, Brittany, shook her head when Belle blushed, puzzled by why the prettiest girl in the coffeehouse would pay attention to the old cod instead of turning her eyes to the blonde-haired Adonis, who was clearly trying to get her attention and get into her pants. It wasn't because of his looks, Belle replied, not looking directly into his eyes as she placed a plate over the paper he had not been reading all along. And I trust you can eat and make fun of me at the same time, Her hand brushed softly against his hair for a moment, and Gold was sure she hadn't realized she had petted him. The girl was going to kill him one day. And it would be glorious, he was sure. As she went back to the counter to look for a rag with which to wipe away the many free tables, the blonde demigod attempted to grab her by the waist, though she definitely moved out of reach just in time. Gold smiled smugly at the whelp, who sneered back while Belle's back was turned to the both of them. Then what is it about the dashing McGregor that moved you to watch a movie about a book you didn't care much for? He hated to ask the question, but perked up when Belle blushed even more deeply and murmured something unintelligible. Oh, come on, dearie. Can't be as bad as that. The brunette made a show of taking a girl's order and filling it, pointedly not looking in Gold's direction. He kept staring at her, though, as she moved from behind the counter to collect discarded papers. Stop staring at me. Tell me. Miss, could I get some water? The annoying blonde jock tried to snag her wrist with his left hand. Hit and miss. And maybe your phone number? In a moment, sir. The smile she gave him was nice, but Gold knew it was not genuine. It had none of the shine of the ones she directed his way. But I'm afraid water is all you'll get. The guy frowned, his charming smile slipping, obviously not dealing well with rejection. Gold, on the other hand, looked positively gleeful at Belle's embarrassment over the McGregor question. "Oh, come on, dearie. Just tell me." As he knew it would, the demand sent Belle over the edge. "It's the accent," she finally admitted, loud enough for the few patrons left in the cafe to startle. "It drives me wild. Happy?" She glowered, the last part stalking past him with a tray to pick up some discarded plates. Gold's sharp intake of breath went mostly unnoticed, and his guarded expression barely concealed the immediate and frightening surge of pleasure at her words. She liked the accent. The Scottish accent. His accent. Him. He was instantly hard in a way he thought he had grown out of when he had abandoned puberty. "Oh," he managed to articulate, suddenly very conscious of the honeyed tinge his brogue gave to his words and trying hard not to think about how he wanted his willful, beautiful barista with her gorgeous smile and shy modesty. How very interesting. The look she gave him could have frozen hell. "Quite," she tightly answered, wanting to both burst out laughing and press her up against the wall in order to have his wicked way with her in front of her co-workers and the one remaining patron. Gold wisely opted for secret option 3. Retreat to the bathroom to splash some freezing water into his face and wait for his hands to stop shaking. He took his time gathering his wits inside the small room, looking at himself in the mirror and muttering over and over to stop being a fool and making her confession into some sort of outright declaration of want on her part just because he wanted it to be so. So concentrated was he on his inner ramblings, he almost missed the sounds of a commotion outside. At first the voices were muffled, but soon enough bells rose, sounding half exasperated and more than a tinge uneasy. "Look, as I've told you, I'm really flattered, but a no is a no." More muffled sounds, an angry male voice, and a crash. "That hurts! Hey, let me go!" He exited the bathroom noiselessly and only took a second to take in the scene in front of him. The blonde idiot looming over Belle, one of her hands squeezed in his, the remains of the dishes she had been clearing from the tables scattered all over the floor. Belle's other hand was keeping the customer at bay while she kept an eye out for Anthony, the guy who usually acted as manager when Gaston's shift was up. Gold had seen him go to the back of the shop to look for a few new bags of coffee, too far away to be of any help. All the better, then. Boasting of a stealth no other limping man could even begin to dream of, the Scotsman noiselessly approached the struggling pair, taking a minute to get a firm grip on his cane from the handleless side before deftly swinging it hard against the young man's back, landing the blow successfully between his shoulder blades. The blonde grunted in surprise and made a move to turn around, but Gold hooked his cane expertly on the hook of the man's elbow, whirling him around before changing his grip on the cane to grab the handle and push the opposite end hard against the youth's windpipe, effectively cutting off all air supply and pinning him against the wall Belle had almost been forced against. Now, now. When a woman says no, boy, a man listens. His voice was at once a soft murmur and a deafening growl. Is that clear? You can nod if you want to. The terrified young man managed to tilt his head up and down a bit. Gold smiled. Splendid. He turned his attention to the wide-eyed barista at his side who was rubbing her sore wrist and staring at him oddly. Would you like him to apologize to you, dear? He sounded like they were talking about the fucking weather, but Belle could not find it in herself to disapprove. Quite the contrary, in fact. No, it's not necessary. She managed to rasp out, her voice husky from her yelling. The businessman nodded at her and turned once again to face the man being slowly choked to death. See, boy? The lady doesn't even want your apology. She doesn't find you worthy of it. In a minute, he'd promised himself he'd let go. He'd stop enjoying it so damn much. And we can't really blame her now, can we? He tried to grasp his self-control but couldn't seem to manage it. His mind was foggy, and the realization that he'd likely kill the boy filled him with nothing but grim satisfaction. It wasn't until soft, warm hands cradled his head that he snapped out of whatever haze he was in. "Please, let him go. I'm okay." Her voice was dazed and faint, but sweet as honey, soothing, like she wasn't absolutely scared of the feral look in his eyes. He dropped the cane to his side, and the blonde jock slumped to the floor, gasping. Belle smiled, her fingers tangled in his long hair, toying with the tuft of gray that hid amongst the brown. "Thank you," she breathed, eyes glassy and her lips lightly parted. There was something in her eyes, something strange he couldn't quite pinpoint. Anthony, the useless little prick, chose that moment to show up, arms loaded with coffee bags. "What the hell happened?" he asked, not necessarily angry. He was fond of Belle in a detached older brother sort of way, and he'd been eyeing the handsy male lingering in the store for a while with suspicion. Now he found him on the floor, and Belle busy murmuring to the long-haired businessman everyone at Starbucks knew was Belle's guy, and he put two and two together, not at all admonishing. "Nothing serious, Tony." The brunette smiled tightly as she watched the blonde stand shakily. "I bumped into this poor man and dropped my tray. No one was hurt, though, thankfully." "Oh. Okay, then." He set the coffee down and calmly strode towards his coworker, bypassing her to haul the rude customer towards the door, muttering something about how he should come again, but not really, according to Tony's body language, and enjoy the rest of his day. Belle, meanwhile, took Mr. Gold to the side, away from the shards of porcelain littering the floor. "You can't do that again," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You shouldn't have done it in the first place. I mean, it was sweet and strangely kind of—" She took a deep breath. "Never mind. But the reality is somebody could have spotted you and recognized you, and then you'd had to explain to what I'm sure is a very unforgiving board of directors why the CEO of Imp Incorporated was caught assaulting someone with his cane." Her eyes were steely, and she seemed at once livid and worried. It took him a second to stop focusing on her and digest her words. "You know who I am." His tone was surprisingly not accusatory. Belle smiled like it had always been obvious. "Of course I do. It was rather obvious. Your cane, your initials, your accent." The blush from before came back. "I realized it 2 months after I started working here." She paused, her face becoming guarded. "And 2 months ago a man came, wanted to know if someone fitting your description came here and if we knew his name. The Daily Mirror press badge was badly concealed under his suit jacket. I told you you had once paid with a credit card, so I knew your name was Nathan Green." Gold spared a fleeting thought for Sydney Glass, the puny cockroach who he was sure was more spying for Regina than working for the rag that had him on its payroll. "Black man, dressed oddly like Humphrey Bogart?" he inquired mellifluously, his voice laced with awe at this impossibly enchanting beauty and her sharp, enticing mind. She had figured him out ages ago and helped him without his knowledge. "Exactly." Her wide smile lit up the room. "He's got to be the worst undercover reporter in existence, by the way." He quite agreed. He left, oddly feeling no fear in the pit of his stomach from Belle's revelation. He knew she would never betray his confidence. Knew it like he knew Mary Margaret was screwing James Charmant behind his fiancé's back, or that one of the security officers in his building, Leroy, had a drinking problem. He felt no pang of remorse about his little stunt with the cane, only happiness that Belle hadn't recoiled from him afterwards. She had, instead, been concerned with his well-being. Concerned and, just as he started to drift off into sleep, safely ensconced in his Upper East Side home, he finally nailed down that dazed look in Belle's eyes. Aroused. He had almost choked a man to death, and his Belle, his beautiful, gentle, incredible dream come fucking true, had been aroused by it. He was in deep, deep trouble.